So I think it was at one time that I had used the expression that humans are angels with anuses, and I wish I could say that that were my expression. It's not. It came from Ernest Becker. I think it's from Ernest Becker's Denial of Death. And Becker is trying to get people to deal with this problem of humans being somewhat positioned between, you could say, two kinds of worlds. I mean, we sort of have one foot in each. The one world is the world of endless events. It's of change. The world that can be seen, that can be touched, that can be heard, the world that's all around us, and the world including our very bodies, is one of age, change, growth, transition. Even though my hand, my body looks somewhat like a thing, it's actually a very complex event. It's unfolding through time. Fire would be another great example. I mean, we have the word fire as if it were a thing, but fire is a very complex process, right? It involves oxygen and rates of chemical exchange. I think part of the problem is that as much as we can admit that all life is change and there's change all around us, we also seem to have one foot planted in something like the unchanging. Oh, someone came on the Skype. I think, just as the simplest example, a word is a principle of repeatability, and a word, as a principle of repeatability, can't be located in that very space and time that seems to be forever changing. The number 2 is another example. See, there's a number 2 that seems to be real and seems to have a constant value, but you can't ever find it in the world. It doesn't seem to be changing, right? The concept 2 seems like an unchanging reality in the same way that pi, or Fibonacci's sequence, or the golden section, there are certain geometric figures, but mathematical figures in arithmetic, not just geometry. When you moved toward something like 2 or 3, we have an unchanging, what's sometimes called an eidetic reality. Now, I guess I'm trafficking around in some of this concern with the changing and the unchanging, and how humans, because they speak, somehow have one foot in a realm that seems to be unchanging. Now, is it really unchanging? I don't know. We can get at that in a second. This morning I watched a very interesting video by Fred. It's Conference Report, and I think the name of the video was called The Naming of Parts. Again, very insightful video. Please, people, check that video out if you have not. There's so much that's insightful in Fred's video, and I found it very, very interesting. One of the issues that I would like to maybe talk about for a second, though, is this question of, if you take making distinctions to the nth degree, does that mean that everything will have a name? See, now this becomes, to me, one of the more interesting questions. I think we do want to say, I could see what his logic was. Oh, that seems so right-minded. Yeah, boy, does that seem right. That if you sort of look around and you see the world, you start to recognize that, what I call pen or pencil, or what I call a notepad, that's just it's an abstraction, because, this is a notepad too, and this is another notepad. And when we do that, we start to realize that notepad was a general classification, and the more nuanced and more particular distinctions we have, the more words we have, the greater, finer grade it can get. I think that seems like it's right. That's very right-minded. But what will we do with the word itself as a distinction? Because it would seem like, as the world itself is changing, I mean, I can't even use notepad for this. I would have to have something like an index number. I would say notepad 1, notepad 2, notepad 3, and pretty soon I'd have to be saying notepad 3421. It would be very odd to start to realize that, I guess, words themselves have, not only are they seem to be a kind of unchanging. That is, the word doesn't change, you get a different word. You get a different one. The word stays the same, but you get a different word. That seems to be the case. But it also seems to be the case that we make distinctions in the world, but we don't name the names. I mean, the names are what we use to make distinctions. The words are what we use to make the distinctions. But we don't simply then have to recategorize each use of a particular word. Again, a word is a principle of repeatability. That would almost, the system would collapse on itself. Once you start to make distinctions in the distinctions that you're making, the problem becomes a self-referential hell, and you can't get out of the gumminess of it. Okay, so I've been trying to get at this question of, are we angels with anuses, or what would that expression mean, and what does it mean to speak of being both in a world of change and variety, but also in some sense a world of unchanging. I think what I would want to argue is that seems was the key word in all the discussion that's been going on here. I don't know if there really is an unchanging. I don't know. I don't think that there probably is. I think when we said the word two, just as an example, every time it is an event of recognizing two. There isn't a two in the world. There's an act of recognizing the two. And that itself is an act. It's not a thing. There are no numbers in the world. There's only acts of counting. And acts of counting are in themselves events. I think that's why pi, we treat it at 3.14 and we don't go into the gory details, but you could go into the gory details infinitely because it is in fact event. It's not, it's a ratio that discloses the eventfulness of the world itself. Right? That universal characteristic is universal, but it's also changing. It's also an event. I guess it is really hard to try to get at what it means to say that humans have a sense of the eternal or the permanent. A person can be in a room and they can cry, or they can say the world's never going to get any better. And there's this sense of never. It's such a funny word, or the person could say, I want everything, I want it all, whatever that means. So less than all could choke a person. So less than any of the words like eternity. Those are, in some sense we want to say, look, a person can't really mean those by those little words. But what do you want? You want words to be other than words? Do you want some is the critique that there's supposed to be some super fantastical kind of transcendence, and because words aren't that, there's no transcendence at all? That seems just so impoverished. That seems like critique by comparison to a repressed boogeyman that was shown to be not true, so therefore the reality doesn't have its own insight. I think when you look back at the ancients, they all seem to recognize, or all they seemed to recognize largely, was the differences between humans and the other animals. Almost to the point of cruelty, right? Vivisection, it's just bizarre. When you think now, today, at how much we recognize that humans are animals, and we recognize natural evolution, I think it's important to see that the ancients, for the most part, and for many centuries, all they could see was the difference. It's kind of like, were they that wrong? Well, they were obviously wrong in some sense, but they must have saw something. I think if you have a stick and it's bent really hard to one side, and you just want the stick to be upright, you crank it hard to the other direction just to get it upright again. And it's that sense of getting a balance in our recognition of how humans are very similar but very different. We are an event, and everything does seem to be eventful. But the eternal that we can taste, that we can open ourselves to, that seems to be the timeless, not the indefinitely ongoing, the timeless, the beyond all tenses, the absolute eternal. Humans somehow seem to have one leg in that, and it's a leg in there that we can come to by realizing that have one leg in change and one leg in a kind of permanence, even if we discover that that kind of permanence is an eventing, there still seems to be an opening that's beyond just simply this little event right here, right now. Okay, so thanks.